After his wife Sarah died, Hank found himself living a life he never imagined. His small ranch, once filled with laughter and love, now felt empty and cold. It had only been a few months since the sickness that took Sarah's life, but the pain still felt fresh every morning. He woke up early to care for their daughter Emily, who was just a baby. The weight of grief made everything harder, and Hank often felt like he was moving through his days in a fog. He had been a strong cowboy for years, but the loss of his wife was something he couldn't simply ride through or fix with hard work. He missed her presence more than he could put into words. Sarah had been everything to him, his partner, his comfort, the mother of his child. And now, he was left alone with Emily. The days were long and tiring. He worked the ranch every morning, and every evening he tried to soothe Emily to sleep. But even with the love he felt for her, Hank was lonely. The silence of the ranch haunted him. He couldn't stop thinking about the way things used to be. He'd come home to Sarah's smile, her soft laughter, and the way she'd care for their home and their baby. But now, those moments were gone, and Hank was left with memories and the constant reminder of his loss. It wasn't just the absence of Sarah that weighed on him. Hank found himself struggling to manage everything. It wasn't easy to do all, the work himself, and he often felt like he was failing as a father. Emily was just a little girl and she needed her mother. Hank did his best to care for her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He tried to keep up with the ranch work, but the cattle were getting harder to manage alone, and the fields were slowly falling behind. The nights were the hardest. As the sun set and Emily slept peacefully in her crib, Hank sat by the fire, his mind wandering. He thought about how different his life had been just a few short years ago. The ranch had been full of life, and now it felt like it was slowly dying. He had no one to share it with anymore. One evening, as Hank was finishing up his chores, he heard footsteps in the distance. At first, he thought it might be one of his neighbors or a fellow rancher, but as the footsteps grew louder, Hank felt a strange unease in his chest. He grabbed his rifle just in case, but he stayed hidden behind the barn. The footsteps drew closer, and then out of the shadows he saw her. A woman. She was dressed in a faded shawl, and her dark hair flowed down her back. Hank's heart raced as she drew closer, but he stayed where he was, watching her carefully. She wasn't someone he recognized. In fact, she looked out of place on his ranch, and for a moment Hank was unsure of what to do. He stood there, rifle in hand, and waited. She stopped just a few feet away from the barn, and their eyes met. There was a calmness in her gaze that put Hank at ease, though he didn't know why. She spoke first, her voice soft and steady. "I'm Sonny," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "I've been traveling with my son. He's sick, and we need shelter for a few nights." Hank didn't lower his rifle, but something about the way she spoke made him pause. She didn't seem threatening, just tired and worn out. Hank hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He didn't often have visitors, and certainly not strangers, but there was something in Sonny's eyes, something familiar and kind, that made him put his gun down slowly. Sonny's story was simple. She had been traveling from a distant town, trying to find help for her sick child. Her husband had passed away years ago, and she had been on her own ever since. Hank listened quietly, still unsure of what to do. "I don't have much," Hank said after a long silence. "But you can stay for a few nights. It's not safe out there, especially with your son sick." Sonny nodded gratefully, her eyes filled with relief. She didn't ask for anything more than shelter and food, and Hank couldn't help but admire her quiet strength. Over the next few days, Sonny stayed with Hank and Emily in the small cabin. Sonny took on small chores around the ranch, gathering firewood and helping with the horses. Despite the quietness that lingered between them, Hank found himself feeling less alone. There was something comforting about Sonny's presence. She didn't talk much about herself, but she had a way of making the house feel warmer, less empty. Hank started to notice the way Sonny seemed to care for Emily. She would rock the baby to sleep with gentle lullabies, and Hank could see the love in her eyes as she did so. It was as if she understood the deep ache of a mother's heart. Even though Emily wasn't her child, One night after Emily had fallen asleep, Sonny and Hank sat by the fire. The crackling of the flames was the only sound in the room, and for a moment, it felt like time had slowed. Sonny spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my husband years ago," she said. "It's hard, living without him, but I've learned to keep going for my son." Hank didn't know what to say. He had never been one to share his feelings, but Sonny's words stirred something inside him. He hadn't really talked about Sarah much since she died. He had kept his grief locked away, thinking he had to be strong for Emily. But in that moment he realized that maybe he didn't have to be alone in his pain. Maybe it was okay to share it with someone else. "I lost my wife," Hank said softly. "It's been hard. Every day is a reminder of what I had and what I've lost. But I keep going for Emily." Sonny nodded, her eyes understanding. "We do what we have to," she said quietly. "For the ones we love." The words hung in the air between them, a bond of shared loss. Hank realized in that moment that he wasn't just helping Sandy and her son. She was helping him too. She had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, someone to share the weight of his grief with. As the days went by, Hank started to feel a change in himself. Sonny's presence brought a peace to his life that he hadn't known since Sarah's death. There was still the pain of loss, of course, but it didn't feel as heavy. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something new, something that could help him heal. But as much as Hank appreciated Sonny's company, there was still a part of him that was afraid. He had been alone for so long that he didn't know if he could let someone else into his life, even if it felt right. He knew that his bond with Sonny was growing, but he also knew that their worlds were different. She was from a different culture, a different way of life. What did it mean for them to share a life together? Hank didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to say goodbye to Sandy just yet. The quiet moments they shared by the fire, the way she cared for Emily and the way she had helped him feel less alone, they meant something. Hank just had to figure out what. For the first time in months, Hank felt a spark of hope. The loneliness that had haunted him was starting to fade, replaced by something else. Something that was beginning to feel like a new beginning. Days turned into weeks and Hank found himself growing more comfortable with Sandy's presence on the ranch. Each day they worked together and each night they shared stories by the fire. The rhythm of their days had become familiar, and Hank found that the weight of his loneliness was starting to lift. Emily, who had been a quiet, content baby, now laughed more often, and Hank couldn't help but feel grateful for the new energy Sonny brought into their home. Sandy's connection with Emily had been immediate. She had a calm and gentle way about her that seemed to soothe the baby. Each time Sandy rocked Emily to sleep, Hank would watch them from the doorway, silently amazed at the bond they had formed. He could see the tenderness in Sandy's eyes as she cared for his daughter, and it made him realize how deeply she understood the struggles of motherhood. Hank couldn't help but think that maybe, in some ways, Sandy was just what his little family needed. Even though they had grown closer, Hank couldn't shake the nagging thought in his mind. He was afraid. He was afraid of what it might mean for him and Sandy to continue down this path. Sandy was an Apache woman, and Hank knew the kind of challenges they would face if they tried to build a life together. The world they lived in was harsh and full of judgment. His neighbors wouldn't understand, and he didn't know how he could navigate that. He feared their connection would only bring trouble for both of them. One evening, after a long day of work, Hank decided to talk to Sandy about his concerns. He found her by the barn gathering firewood. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the land, and for a moment Hank just stood there watching her. She looked at peace, but Hank could see the uncertainty in her eyes too. She was a woman with a past, and Hank knew that the road ahead would be difficult for both of them. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Hank began, his voice uncertain. "About you, about us." Sandy paused and turned to face him. Her eyes were calm, but Hank could tell she was waiting for him to continue. He took a deep breath. "I don't know if this is the right thing," he said slowly. "I don't know what kind of trouble we'll face if we keep going down this road. You're an Apache woman and I'm just a cowboy. People around here, they won't understand." Sandy looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know what you're afraid of, Hank," she said. "I've seen the way people look at me. I've lived with that my whole life. But that doesn't mean we can't find our own way. We don't have to live by their rules. We can make our own." Hank was silent for a moment, trying to process her words. Part of him wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that they could somehow find happiness despite the world around them. But another part of him was terrified of the consequences. He had already lost so much. Could he risk losing more? Sani stepped closer to him, her voice low and gentle. "I'm not asking for a perfect life, Hank. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to build something new, with you, with Emily." Her words hit him harder than he expected. The idea of building something new, of starting over, had seemed impossible to him for so long. But now, standing there with Sani, he realized that maybe it wasn't as impossible as he thought. "I don't know if I'm ready," Hank admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." Sani nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," she said softly. "But we can take it one step at a time," and so they did. Over the following weeks, Hank and Sani grew even closer. They worked side by side on the ranch, each day bringing them a little bit more in sync. Sani taught Hank new ways to tend to the land, ways that Hank had never learned before. Her knowledge and wisdom were invaluable, and Hank found himself relying on her more and more. At night they sat together by the fire, talking about their lives, their hopes, and their fears. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Sani spoke about her life before she came to Hank's ranch. She told him about her childhood in a small Apache village, about the love she had shared with her husband and the pain of losing him. Hank listened carefully, feeling a deep sense of respect for her strength. He realized that, just like him, Sani had endured so much loss, and yet, she had kept moving forward, even when the world seemed to have turned its back on her. As the weeks passed, Hank's fear began to fade. It wasn't gone completely, but it didn't control him the way it once had. He started to see a future with Sani, a future where they could build something together, something that was strong and lasting, despite the challenges they would face. And Emily, who had once been so quiet and unsure, now seemed to thrive in the warmth of their little family. She laughed more, she played more, and Hank felt his heart swell with love for her every day. But even as Hank began to imagine a future with Sani, he knew there would be obstacles. He had already seen the way some of the townspeople looked at her, and he knew that not everyone would accept their bond. Still, he found himself more willing to face those challenges. He had always been a man who faced adversity head-on, and he wasn't about to let fear stop him now. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, Hank found himself thinking about the future. He had never been one to dream much. Life on the ranch had always been about survival, not about hoping for something better. But with Sani by his side, he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than just surviving. "I'm glad you're here," Hank said, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Sani smiled at him, a soft, understanding smile. "You're stronger than you think, Hank," she said. "We both are." And in that moment, Hank knew that she was right. Together they were stronger. Together they could face whatever the future held, no matter what others thought. As the days passed, their bond only grew stronger. Sani became an integral part of Hank's life, and Emily thrived in the love and care that surrounded her. Hank realized that even in the face of hardship and uncertainty, he had found something worth fighting for. His family, his future, and the love that was blossoming between him and Sani. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long while, Hank felt ready to face it. With Sani by his side, he wasn't just surviving, he was living, and that was enough.